My name is Laura, I'm 34, and I've always been in my sister Sophia's shadow. Growing up, I got used to being invisible in our family, the one who watched the world shine around her, never quite managing to penetrate that light. My mother's death brought the weight of this invisibility into brutally sharp focus. When the family lawyer read the will, I could barely contain my disbelief. Every word was like a punch to the gut, and the room, full of familiar faces, became a spectacle of disdain. I, the forgotten daughter, was just a ghost, invisible and untouchable. To Sophia, I leave the country house and all my possessions. To Laura, nothing. The echo of that nothing hammered in my mind as I looked around, catching the smug look on Sophia's face and the indifference of my father, who had always been absent in decisive moments. The feeling of betrayal spread like wildfire through my veins. My mother, though no longer present, continued to manipulate the strings of my life, even in the silence of death. At that moment, when the lawyer finished reading, I was paralyzed. What did I truly represent to our mother? A less loved daughter, a failed project of love that never received a return. I remember a superficial smile displayed by Sophia, as if she had finally won the war we'd been waging throughout our lives. The pain of seeing that expression cut me deeply, feeling that everyone, even those who should have supported me, had united against me. Indignation boiled in my throat. The phrase echoing in my mind, the only certainty amidst the chaos was, "They forgot I'm also my mother's daughter, and now I'll show my worth." A determination began to rise from the ashes of my pain. The feeling of powerlessness began to transform into a seed of rebellion. How could I have let this family dynamic dictate my worth? The answer was clear. I shouldn't have. It was time to stop being the supporting character in my own life story. In the days following the reading of the will, I became a spectator of my own life, my gaze deepening into frustrating and insulting moments within that house. Trivial conversations about the division of assets became a constant reminder of my exclusion. I saw Sophia surrounded by affection and comfort, enveloped by the family that idolized her. And me? I was relegated to the position of a silent observer, trying to ignore every sneering giggle she directed at me in conversations with our relatives. I'm not just a forgotten daughter, but someone with an inner strength that needs to be revealed. No longer a shadow accepting scorn. With rebellion burning in my chest, I made a silent promise to myself. It was an oath made in the depths of my pain. I would rise again and find my true voice, the one that had always been there, suffocated under expectations and favoritism. I would not only fight for myself, but for all those who have felt the same pain. Understanding the depth of that injustice, the path to personal transformation began to open before me. The fight had begun, and I was ready to face it. It was impossible not to look back and see the years of favoritism that shaped my life and Sophia's. The echoes of my childhood still resonated in my memory, bringing to the surface moments where I felt like I was on an empty stage, while my sister received all the spotlight. I remember a birthday where Sophia got a brand new, shiny red bicycle, while I only received a new pair of sneakers, a gift that barely covered the worn-out shoes I was using. "Look at Sophia's beautiful bike," my aunts would say, laughing. It was in this atmosphere of laughter that my heart began to close, building walls around an already wounded ego. These moments of preference became routine. I remember the time the teacher praised us for our schoolwork at a parent-teacher meeting. "Sophia is so talented, following in her mother's footsteps," she said, while I felt my face burn with involuntary blush. Looking around and seeing the pride on my father's face was like a punch to the gut. The seat next to me remained empty, always in the shadow of the sister everyone expected to achieve great things. The favoritism wasn't just a matter of love. It was a poison that corroded my self-esteem day after day. Sunday lunches were a silent battlefield. Sophia shone amidst praise for her academic and social achievements. "How did you get promoted so quickly in your dance classes, Sophia? I'm so proud," my mother would say, without even looking at me. I sat at the corner of the table, practicing a smile that never quite reached my eyes, while the broken expectation crushed hope, always waiting for a word of recognition. But all that came was silence or indifference. The truth is, these memories didn't just hurt me, they shaped how I saw my own life. I felt like a helpless spectator, fighting against a tide that never stopped pushing me back. But the pain, though silent, was beginning to create space within me for rebellion. However, with each new reminder, there was a part of me that hesitated to take a stand, a voice in my head whispering that I was still loved, after all. After the will reading, a fierce determination began to form within me, a flame burning with the need to refuse my position of scorn. The conversations about the inheritance continued intensely, but Sophia's indifference and disdain towards me became increasingly evident. This suffocating hostility now became a driving force, an urgency to uncover the truth that was being concealed. I remember a lunch where she said with a sneering smile, "Think the country house is yours, Laura? I'm sorry, but the real value is in who actually does something with it." Those words cut like a knife. They were full of venom and contempt, but also a truth I could no longer ignore. Why should I be defined by her words? I realized I needed to rewrite this narrative. That's when I decided to seek out Lucas, a friend from school who had become a lawyer. Our paths crossed at a casual reunion, and explaining the situation, I noticed his attentive gaze. He not only understood my pain, but also fueled my desire to fight. "Laura, you shouldn't submit to this. Your rights are just as valid as hers," he said. These words were like balm on an old wound and sealed my determination. With Lucas's support, I began investigating the inheritance. What had been left in my name? What was Sophia really up to? My mind buzzed as I revisited every conversation and document. Every small detail seemed to be a clue. One night, I examined old papers until an envelope caught my eye. A letter from my mother. Her words were words of encouragement, urging me to follow my own path and use my passion for technology, a path she saw as mine. Reading the letter transformed my despair into strength. "Don't hesitate to shine," she wrote, and that message resonated deeply within me. I wasn't just the forgotten daughter. There was a potential entrepreneur waiting to be discovered. Technology didn't play favorites, and that realization ignited hope in my heart. I could be more. I had the power to shape my own destiny. I began to piece together everything I'd learned from Lucas, diving into research on inheritance rights and wills. The pieces that had seemed disconnected before now formed a clearer picture. I began to see Sophia's maneuvers as a dance, an attempt to hide truths that could be revealed. The idea of confronting her with this information was now closer than ever. With each discovery, rebellion transformed into strategy. I came to understand that the fight wasn't just against Sophia, but for myself, for the affirmation of my worth. My meetings with Lucas became more frequent, and my knowledge grew exponentially. He was a mentor who helped me see what had always been there, the potential I had to transform not only my life, but to end the distorted narrative Sophia had created around me. One day, after an intense work session, I looked at my computer screen, at the lines of code that now flowed effortlessly. Symbolically, this represented what I wanted to achieve, the creation of a new story, not just about my family, but about me. I had the ability to change the paradigm that surrounded me, to step out of the shadows and finally make my own name resonate. At that moment, the need to act became undeniable. I was more than ready to grow beyond the limitations that had been imposed on me. The seeds I had planted in despair were transforming into flowers of resilience and determination. My focus was now not only the truth to be revealed, but also the desire to shine. And it was with this new energy that I decided that, when confronting Sophia, I would do it not only for myself, but for all women who had felt invisible and worthless. With each step, I became more aware of who I was and what I was ready to become. My journey of transformation had begun, and the battle for recognition was about to be fought. I was determined to go after what was rightfully mine, and finally, illuminate my own path. Each passing day, the determination in my heart grew like a flower in full spring, blossoming in beauty and strength. With Lucas's support and clarity in my mind, I immersed myself in the world of technology, studying incessantly to found my own startup. In the silent hours of the night, in front of my computer, I sketched ideas, structured business plans, and consulted marketing and design books. I feel that, for the first time, I was building not just something I dreamed of, but a solid bridge to the future. Each line of code I typed seemed to break down the barriers that Sophie and the rest of my family had erected around me. From an initial idea for an app focused on digital awareness, the fragments of my life came together unexpectedly. I wanted something that spoke the language of the vulnerabilities I grew up with, that helped people connect, defend themselves against digital manipulation and injustice, something I always wanted to strengthen within myself. It was a project full of personal meaning, a declaration that I could be more than the forgotten daughter. I had discovered in a dark corner of my soul a powerful voice, a woman who refuses to be defined by the circumstances that surrounded her. However, along with progress, the tension of my new reality grew in parallel. Sophia noticed the space I was conquering and reacted with the expected coldness. Once, during a family gathering, she commented, "It's great to see you're having fun, but don't forget that the digital world can be treacherous." The laughter in the room dispersed after her words. I felt on the verge of exploding, but at that moment I restrained myself. After years of exclusion, calmness had become an armor. With a well-rehearsed smile, I replied, "Hardly, when you learn to navigate the currents." My words resonated in a new tone. My meetings with Lucas were not limited to legal advice, but became a source of inspiration. We talked about the importance of a true purpose in everything we do. During a brainstorming session, he told me, "You are creating your own narrative. Don't let the past define your future." Each conversation became fuel for my ideas, and our dreams of working together created a powerful synergy. In one of our meetings, he introduced an investment app, a promising way to raise funds for startups. This idea pulsed in me like a calling. I could, in fact, fund my project. I then decided to participate in an important upcoming startup competition, a perfect opportunity not only to showcase my idea, but to generate the capital I needed. Excitement and nervousness combined as the deadline approached. At this stage, I realized that I was not only seeking external recognition, but internal validation for the woman I was becoming. I even imagined myself on stage, presenting my idea and looking at the audience, which included not only potential investors, but also my family. The idea that they might see my struggle and finally understand my worth filled me with strength. However, one thought persisted. Would Sophia try to hinder me on this journey? I knew that as I grew, my sister would feel increasing envy. Her scornful gaze never left me, and therefore I needed to be prepared. With this in mind, I sought to strengthen not only the content of my project but also my confidence. I decided to take a presentation and public speaking course, something that would give me not only the ability to communicate, but also to assert myself in a space that had always been hostile to me. When the big day arrived, I was nervous but incredibly excited. The event would be held in a modern space, full of people who, like me, dreamed of transforming their ideas into realities. While waiting for my turn to present, I looked at the faces of the people around me and took a deep breath. This was my chance. As I stepped onto the stage, Sophia's familiar gaze weighed on me, but I couldn't falter. Adrenaline propelled me forward, and when I started to speak, something magical happened. It wasn't just words coming out of my mouth, but the very essence of what I represented. My name is Laura, and I'm here today to share an idea that's not just mine, but of all the women who have ever felt invisible. The words resonated, and I saw pockets of hope reflected in the faces of the audience, With each slide revealed, watching their reactions, I knew I was touching hearts. I was no longer the forgotten daughter. I was an entrepreneur, a woman fighting for and increasingly conquering her space in the world. My eyes met Sophia's, and for the first time, her gaze didn't seem dismissive, but incredulous. As the presentation ended, applause erupted like a roar, resonating through the packed room. Tired but exhilarated, I stepped off the stage where Lucas waited, his eyes shining with pride. I'd won an award, and more importantly, discovered a new version of myself I never imagined. One who could claim her space without worrying about what others thought or said. The steps I'd taken on that stage weren't just towards victory, but a giant leap towards an authentic Laura. It was a full circle moment. I realized my transformation didn't depend only on external confrontations, but on internal ones as well. I finally stood at the center of my new reality, and in doing so, was reborn. The life I'd built mirrored what was once my greatest fear. The echo of invisibility was now a distant whisper, replaced by an explosion of self-affirmation. This was the beginning of a new era, where I finally allowed myself to shine. The days following the transformative event were filled with a mixture of euphoria and insecurity. I had won the award, but what came next? Now, with a recognized idea, the pressure mounted. I needed to turn that initial success into a solid foundation for my startup. My heart was ready to face any challenge, but the weight of expectations also pressed heavily on my shoulders. With Lucas's support and the recognition I'd gained, we began working intensely on developing my app. He introduced me to potential investors, and each meeting became a new opportunity to show that I was no longer the forgotten daughter. I was shaping my future. It was clear my name was circulating in a new world where the echoes of my insecurities were fading. Every positive piece of feedback, every email of interest, fueled the flames of my ambition. As I immersed myself in this new landscape, an unexpected feeling began to bloom within me. As positive as it was, there was also a growing sense of anxiety, an internal battle that flared whenever I thought of Sophia. I knew she was watching my progress somewhere, and anticipating her reaction made my workday even more challenging. A part of me felt it was only a matter of time before she tried to discredit or undermine my achievements. The anger I had suppressed began to resurface. One cloudy afternoon, while reviewing the app prototype, I received a message from Lucas. He was excited to share that Sophia was presenting at an upcoming business fair, and rumors suggested she would try to derail what I'd accomplished. My heart pounded. A mixture of adrenaline and fear pulsed through my body, reminding me of my mother's words, always encouraging me to be resilient. It was time for a direct confrontation. Without hesitation, I decided I wouldn't hide from this battle. To do so, I needed to be armed with the truth and the data that supported my idea. I went to the event, prepared not just to hear what Sophia had to say, but to stand my ground. When I entered the room, the energy was palpable. Hundreds of entrepreneurs and investors were milling around. For a moment, I felt a little intimidated, but quickly remembered why I was there. I was fighting for my truth. When she took the stage, Sophia's presence was undeniable. She radiated confidence, asking questions and subtly critiquing my proposal. "Certainly, the market isn't kind to those who simply dream. It takes pragmatism," she said, eliciting nervous laughter from the audience. The part of me that had always felt inferior was about to rear its head. The resentment of not having a place in the world began to transform into an energy I didn't know I possessed. It was time to respond. Waiting for my moment, I raised my hand and asked to speak. The room immediately fell silent, and all eyes turned to me. A pang of nervousness and a surge of adrenaline coursed through me, but I took a deep breath. "Sophia," I began, "what's being discussed here is more than just an idea. It's about the inclusion of all voices that have been silenced. It's about the change we want to see in the world." Her look was a mixture of surprise and disdain, but that only gave me more strength. What you call a dream, I see as a reality in progress. And these aren't just numbers. These are lives we want to impact. A murmur went through the audience, and that moment of confrontation became a turning point. Instead of seeing me as the relegated daughter, the room began to see the woman who was emerging, a woman who stood firm, who was determined to earn her right to be heard. The reaction of those present began to slowly shift. I could feel sympathy and support growing around me. After the event, a feeling of liberation washed over me. I had confronted the truth and the injustice. What Sophia had tried to use to sideline me now became a testament to the struggle so many of us face. I left feeling triumphant, not just for the victory over my sister, but for finally accepting that my worth didn't depend on those around me, but on what I was willing to fight for. The crescendo of my new life was forming into a vibrant symphony. My app's success wasn't just attracting investors, it was starting to change the narrative that had always kept me in the shadows of my family history. Invitations to conferences and networking events became commonplace. I sought not only market validation, but the transformation of a family legacy. Deep down, every step I took building my presence in the business world was a reckoning with old memories and wounds, a paradox I was finally ready to confront. It was at one of these events that I received a special invitation, a speaking engagement at a women's empowerment forum where Sophie was also scheduled to speak. A mix of excitement and apprehension flooded my emotions. It was the first time we'd be in the same space since the business fair encounter, and I knew I needed to make it count. In the days leading up to the event, I dedicated myself to crafting a presentation that reflected not only what I was creating professionally, but also the message I'd always wanted to convey. I was about to show not just Sophie, but all women who'd ever felt invisible, that resilience, struggle, and authenticity could shape the future. I felt the adrenaline pumping, and with each sentence I wrote, the echoes of all those sleepless nights became my allies. On the day of the event, the atmosphere was electric as I entered the auditorium. I could feel the tension in the air, as if everyone was waiting for an impending battle. Sophie was there, with her usual smile, but there was a glint in her eyes that betrayed her unease. The unmistakable parade of achievements and the shine she projected couldn't intimidate me. Instead, I found comfort in the inner strength I'd cultivated throughout my journey. When it was my turn to speak, I walked onto the stage with the confidence of someone finally seeking the truth. I'm Laura, and I'm here to talk about the importance of being seen and heard. The space was mine, and for the first time, I wasn't just claiming a space. I was proclaiming my right to exist and shine. During my presentation, I shared not only the journey of how my app was created, but also the experiences that shaped me as a woman and entrepreneur. I recounted the hardships, the scorn, and the overcoming I encountered as I shed the weight of invisibility. The audience's gaze now reflected empathy, and each smile reinforced my message. Finally, after concluding my speech, the warmth of applause echoed throughout the auditorium. I wasn't just there to win hearts. I was there to make a statement. I was no longer the ignored daughter or the overshadowed sister. They applauded not just a business success story, but a claim for justice, for the voice of all those who had been silenced. Looking out at the audience, I found Sophie. Her expression was serene, but there was a surprise in her eyes that spoke volumes. Instead of a look of disdain, I perceived a small crack of recognition. Finally, whatever she thought, I was bringing a new narrative to light. After the event, a cocktail reception was held, providing a space for questions and interaction. However, my mind was still processing the wave of emotion and the newfound strength I carried. As I made my way across the room, I saw Sophie chatting with an investor, her usually haughty demeanor seeming to crumble upon noticing my presence. With an unexpected surge of impulse, I approached her. "We need to talk," I said, taking a deep breath. Her gaze shifted into an expression that mixed defiance and curiosity. "You can't keep thinking of me as just a shadow. Don't you see me differently now? I asked directly. The heavy silence that followed was broken only by the investor, who seemed surprised. I just didn't realize you had so much potential, Laura. What you presented today was inspiring, she said, praising me. And in that instant, the dynamic between us seemed to shift. Sophie, despite being the favorite, was now challenged by the recognition of my worth. I decided to seize the moment. We can be moved by the story, but we can't ignore that this potential was suppressed for a long time. I'm not here to take anything from you, but to show that we all have a place. The words came out as a release I didn't know I still held. Sophie fell silent, weighing the implications of everything we'd said. I expected a defensive response, but instead, she simply nodded slowly, as if finally beginning to see the bigger picture. Maybe I underestimated you, Laura. What you did today was assert yourself, and that deserves respect, she replied, breaking down the wall of hostility. In that moment, I realized the transformation would be mutual. The confrontation wasn't just about competition, but about growth and the empowerment that could arise from joining forces. The resentment that had separated us visibly dissolved. And there, in the warmth of that cocktail party, I felt a new beginning being born. At that point, I let go of past insecurities. By choosing to no longer define myself through the eyes of others, my idea of family began to expand beyond the toxicity that had prevailed before. Reconciliation is a step-by-step process, and life showed me that it can be not only about overcoming, but also about uniting. Regardless of what the future held, the strength I found within myself would become even more powerful with support. And even if the struggle sometimes felt heavy, the renewed determination only amplified the light I projected. The recognition I had always sought now radiated from the inside out. I felt alive and fearless, a new Laura emerging, ready to shine brightly. And finally, I realized that while I struggled to be seen, I was also teaching other women, and perhaps even my sister, that true worth doesn't always need to be contested. It's undeniably ours by birthright. The reconciliation with Sophie was a significant turning point in our relationship, transforming what was once competition into a new alliance. In the following months, our conversations became more frequent and deeper as we began to open up about our experiences. What was once a heavy atmosphere was becoming a space of understanding. The resentment I held in my heart began to dissipate, and I realized that forgiving myself for feeling inferior was essential. In one of these conversations, I suggested we organize a workshop for women entrepreneurs. The idea of joining forces to help other women find their voices and strengths became a shared purpose. The event, which we called Rising Voices, was born from a desire to transform our experiences and frustrations into something positive and inspiring. We developed the program together, combining our knowledge and inviting speakers who could share their stories of overcoming adversity. The enthusiasm grew as the registrations came in, and every time I looked at the number of women willing to participate, my pride increased. That room full of women was about to become a sacred space of empowerment. On the day of the workshop, the atmosphere was vibrant. As we walked onto the stage, I felt the invigorating energy of the audience, filled with hopeful faces. I began to speak, expressing the importance of understanding our individual and collective potential. We are stronger together, I said, looking at the women around us. And today we are here to celebrate that power. The feedback we received was overwhelming. Each panel discussion and each interaction brought to light stories of struggle and overcoming that weren't just ours, but those of all the women present. The event became a symbol of connection and support, something I had always sought and finally found in Sophie and the participants. The dynamic of our family began to transform in this process. Sophie and I were no longer just sisters, we were partners, united by a higher purpose. Honest dialogue and a willingness to support each other strengthened our bonds, fostering a new understanding between us. Together, we began to see that instead of competing, we could consolidate the strength that had always existed in our relationship. As time went on, I let go of the need for family approval that I had always sought. Instead, I began to take pride in who I was and what I had accomplished. My worth was now intrinsic, and the fight for my voice transformed into a collective effort. I felt alive, a new Laura, ready to shine with all my nuances. This experience wasn't just a milestone in my personal journey, it was the beginning of a new era for our family. The scars of childhood began to heal, showing that it was possible to rediscover bonds that seemed lost. The resentment was left behind, replaced by a genuine desire to support and recognize not only our achievements, but those of all the women in our community. Looking at the sparkle in the eyes of the event participants, I realized that many of them could be a new generation of leaders, ready to transform their own stories. At that moment, I understood that my role wasn't just that of an individual seeking recognition, but that of a mentor and supporter. That's how, amidst a new family and community dynamic, I understood that the voices that were once silenced now echoed powerfully. By joining forces, Sophie and I not only wrote a new story, but left a legacy of empowerment for all who followed us. My worth was now intrinsic, and the fight for my voice transformed into a collective effort. I felt alive, a new Laura, ready to shine with all my nuances. This experience wasn't just a milestone in my personal journey, it was the beginning of a new era for our family. The scars of childhood began to heal, showing that it was possible to rediscover bonds that seemed lost. The resentment was left behind, replaced by a genuine desire to support and recognize not only our achievements, but those of all the women in our community. Looking at the sparkle in the eyes of the event participants, I realized that many of them could be a new generation of leaders, ready to transform their own stories. At that moment, I understood that my role wasn't just that of an individual seeking recognition, but that of a mentor and supporter. That's how, amidst a new family and community dynamic, I understood that the voices that were once silenced now echoed powerfully. By joining forces, Sophie and I not only wrote a new story, but left a legacy of empowerment for all who followed us.